Welcome back to the Finding Genius video series. I'm joined by Aaron Gani. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, Kanal.
Aaron has been creating applications and experiences with technology throughout his career in healthcare, up to most recently actually serving as the CTO of Humana, which is the Fortune 550 managed care organization. So that's really exciting to have someone of your caliber on. And more recently, which is what we're here to speak about, Aaron is now the CEO and founder of BehaVR. And the last part of that is actually VR. So that we'll focus on that technology stack, which is a company that's, like the name suggests, is transforming patient care through VR. So I'm excited to have this conversation. But before we get into it, it would be great to learn a bit about your path and your understanding of different technology stacks at Humana, and then what led to the genesis of behavior and that focus on VR. I think that would be exciting to learn more about.
Sure. So I have been a technologist, or some would say nerd, my whole life, going all the way back to childhood and my first computer, and have just always enjoyed creating things with technology from the earliest days of anything I ever got paid to do, and worked in financial services for many years in corporate technology roles. I always tended towards new system development and sort of pushing the edge of how can we enable the business differently. I got into healthcare in 2006 when I joined Humana, and I was there for a dozen years in technology and innovation roles. And as you mentioned, I was the CTO for the last couple of years. What that meant at Humana, because it means different things in different companies, was technology advancement. So my job was to look out into the future, look at emerging technologies that were coming towards us, and figure out how do we use those for the improvement of our members' health. And so I loved it. It's a great company, still is. Many friends there and great experiences. The problem I had was I was getting to mid-career and just have always wanted my own business, just forever. And I got to a point I couldn't not do it anymore. And so I spent about a year thinking about what problem to tackle. What I settled on was the opportunity to rethink how we can actually scale up solutions to the mental and behavioral health challenges that we face in the US and globally. The scale of the need far outstrips the available clinicians to solve the problem. And so to me, it seems obvious and inevitable that we are going to use technology, and specifically the power of like digital therapeutics, if you want to use sort of that
Right.
industry tag now, to scale up something that is evidence-based, proven, safe, effective, to meet the scale of the need when we know that we can't scale up human clinicians at the same pace. So
Got it.
it was a focus on mental and behavioral, both as a discrete area of need, but then there's a couple other levels. There's this highly comorbid cluster of things that many people struggle with around stress, anxiety, depression, pain, opioids, substances. Not everybody, but many people, they're really dealing with a whole tangled cluster of those things. And then those things are also highly comorbid with the whole range of chronic conditions where we spend 85% of our $4 trillion plus dollars a year in the US healthcare system. So with my Humana hat on in managed care, what I saw was not only a huge area of unmet need, but a huge value unlock, right? If we can scale up these digital interventions to help this meta comorbidity that touches so many chronic conditions through mental and behavioral health innovation, that's where I want to focus. And I've had that personal experience in my immediate family and extended family, seeing the devastation and the impact of that on people's lives. So for me, that was the right problem.
Interesting. And before we get into that, I think what would be helpful too is to learn a bit about, as a CTO of Humana, when you are seeing, like you're saying, what technologies are coming towards us and how is that going to revolutionize healthcare, how did you use to evaluate different technology stacks and say, this is just kind of a blip? It's not going to be a lasting technology or lasting innovation here. It's not really providing the efficacy that we need in healthcare. What does that matrix look like for how you evaluate opportunities with tech on one side and healthcare on the other, and what maybe founders usually get wrong?
Well, I think a key element of how we thought about the range of technologies that we would look out into the future and assess is that perhaps none of them, maybe if I thought long enough, I could think of an exception, but let's go with none of them exist on their own. They exist as sort of a tapestry, right? A full stack of something. There's, what's happening with cloud and analytics and AI, and maybe quantum will advance that. And then there's XR computing and wearables. And like these things are not discrete and sort of in their own swim lane, touched by nothing else. It's really about what is your full stack solution to push forward like the art of the possible for some new consumer or member engagement or experience or therapeutic intent, right? But that's probably a third of the innovation that's required, maybe, right? So you got to pick the right problem. You got to look at what's the tapestry of solutions technologically that need to be, or which technologies need to be sort of woven into that tapestry, right?
Right, right.
That's the objective. And then you need some way to scale that up operationally, and you got to have some level of business model innovation. And there's different degrees, right? A lot of companies in digital health, while they're doing great things, when you really peel it back, what they're doing is wrapping digital engagement layers around human care delivery models and maybe getting some marginal scalability or access improvements as a result. And there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. We need all sorts of different innovations. What I sought to do was try to go a little further out in terms of where the puck is going on a couple of dimensions. And it's really, we're operating at the intersection of three, what I think are like generational shifts. One is the shift from fee-for-service to value-based care, which is a care model, business model innovation, which doesn't necessarily have much of anything to do with technology, although technology is the answer, right? So value-based care. The second is this new sort of subsector of digital therapeutics, or the notion that you can bake proven science into a digital product or experience, and you can go through all the heavy lifting to prove, clinically with the, imprimatur of like FDA, this is safe and effective and private, and we've thought about the right study protocols, the right endpoints. We can compare this to standards of care in an effective way. And then the third dimension is XR, or virtual reality for now, augmented reality in the future, which I think is yet another shift. So these things exist on their own. We're operating at the intersection of those. The last one, candidly, was about being intentional about going further out, because I knew that this company would take many years to build, many years to get the evidence. I didn't want to be the 150th CBT app on a smartphone. I wanted to be the third or second or first really robust therapeutic working in virtual reality with all the right sort of elements of cognitive behavioral therapy and exposure and reframing and all these process-based things baked into it.
Interesting. And that's a very helpful framework for how you laid it out for us in terms of how you think about kind of the shifts in healthcare and technology. And if we focus in on that third and fourth, in terms of VR technology, I mean, there's been VR or XR, like you're saying it too. There's been waves of hype, and then it's been disappointment, and there's been a lot of funding towards the space. When you looked at that history, and we're now saying we're going to actually believe in this shift that's coming in the third and fourth generation of it, what were the big milestones that you saw that were happening in VR, and how that could be applied towards healthcare, and maybe some of that data that you were seeing for that second trend that you pointed to, that said this is how I want to spend my career now and focus on this.
Yeah, so the second trend around digital therapeutics, there were leaders in the space to look to say, okay, this is a new sector opening up, right? You could look at paratherapeutics and the work that Corey and his team are doing, or Achille that just went public. Congrats, Eddie and team. Like we didn't have to be the first there, right? There's a pattern.
Right.
Not everything is sorted out. There are questions about long-term reimbursement structures and so on, but there was signs lighting the way. With VR, initially, candidly, it was more of a hunch. It was like, I think this is going to be really transformative in how we interact with technology. I wonder what this immersive multisensory simulation is going to mean for mental and behavioral health. And it didn't take long of early research when I was just getting the company started to find, somewhat to my surprise, at the time, and it's been actually 6 years now, at the time there were 15 years of research of, high quality clinical studies and research showing a number of different use cases for medical virtual reality, if you want to think of it that way. And there's different hotspots and sectors. And so there's some great work and groundwork laid for, a decade and a half, and now 2 decades, from folks like Walter Greenleaf and Hunter Hoffman and Skip Rizzo and Mel Slater and Brenda Wiederhold and others, showing that this is a real thing. Like there is real clinical signal and efficacy here that's different from what we can do in a 2D flat experience. And so that to me is like, okay, we have this next generation medium, which is unlike, I mean, the way your brain processes this immersive multisensory simulation is fundamentally unlike anything we do on a 2D screen. Everything we do in 2D, it's just you're looking at it. Might be engaging and exciting and boring or whatever it is, but you're not inside it. And with VR, it is something very, very different. And we won't go into it in this discussion. I don't think we have time, but we go deep into why does that matter? You know, what does this do for threat processing centers in the brain and how we use that to deliberately calm or arouse responses in people and sort of physiological and emotional responses. So very different medium. It is the next medium. And I'm sure you know the story of, you know, Facebook's acquisition of Oculus and how that's supercharged the space. If I'm completely candid, I thought we would be further along to steepening the adoption curve by now. You know, if you'd asked me in 2016 when I founded the company. So we're a little behind where I thought we'd be, but not terribly so. You know, it's still advancing. Next generation products coming from Meta this year and next are pretty exciting. Of course, the rampant rumors of Apple coming into the space would be very welcome. And there's other good companies as well. So all the signals are, you know, the tech is doing what I thought it would do, which is cheaper, faster, better, leaps forward every 12 to 18 months. And then we have all of this sort of structural, you know, these indicators of structural reform and advancement in the industry with digital therapeutics and value-based care. It's going to come together nicely.
That's great. Could you, just to shift gears a bit, and I guess in the 6 years, if we focus in on individual phases, I would love to talk about a bit about the 0 to 1 of starting a company like this, how you kind of, your first partnerships and how you began to work on it. But it would be interesting to hear about the patient journey a bit in terms of what does a patient look like when they actually come and work with BehaVR and actually work through some of the issues. And I know obviously there's only some things that you can share, but perhaps some high level anecdotes of how this is actually working on the behavioral health side, specifically with your company.
Sure. So, you know, we've tried to play a long game here from the start at this company and think about, you know, recognizing how those macro trends will converge that I mentioned, right? Value-based care, digital therapeutics, XR,
right,
while acknowledging that there are going to be a lot of steps along the way. I've got enough, you know, gray hair. I lived through a number of prior tech sort of S curves of, you know, from personal computers being considered toys to, of course, everybody has one. And then the same thing with mobility and with cloud computing and with AI. And so I had a strong sense that the XR space would advance and that along that way, there would be a number of waypoints where we would find the technology to be too clunky, too expensive, not a great experience. Like we expected that. We fully expected it. So what we did was early on chose a path of partnering with people who have deep clinical domain expertise in every space that we work in. So if it's anxiety and depression, it's our partners at Sumitomo Pharma. In the pain and musculoskeletal space, it's our partners at Confluent Health, and so on. So find people who have deep domain expertise so they can expand our available brain power on the clinical problem. And then in terms of building out and proving a product, we took a path, we're certainly not alone, but we're unlike a lot of companies where we didn't try and leap right to an FDA-cleared therapeutic. We deliberately started with wellness programs where we would make no claims about treating, curing, preventing, but it would allow us to get products out faster, get them in the hands of real consumers or patients, if you will, and real clinicians faster, so we could iterate and learn and make them better, because we think that's the only way to build a digital product. So we started in clinical settings where you could overcome some of the clunkiness of the technology solutions. You still needed to work hard to make it as simple as possible, but you could reach more people that maybe had never heard of VR, but their physical therapist says, hey, Kunal, I have this solution for your chronic pain. I want you to try, right? And so, you know, make it a little easier to get going and get the flywheel going with an anticipation that we'd be able to move into the home, which has proven true over time as the available headsets and the price points and the consumer grade experience has gotten better. In the last, 2.5 years now, we've been in home as well as in clinical settings. And it's a continuing journey. Yeah.
Right. And in these, I mean, I think so. We go way back, but then now you also had COVID, which I'm sure accelerated some of the at-home care.
Yeah.
How did behavior begin to play in with that space? I mean, was that a significant uptick in adoption and how people were seeking care that they needed at that point in time?
For us, you're right. As it turned out, we had just launched the second generation of our chronic pain program when COVID hit. We had already been planning to make sort of a home version of it, and we just accelerated that. Um, so we got it done a few months earlier than we might otherwise have done. So there was definitely reaction, and the COVID shift to the biggest impact was, stakeholders across healthcare believing more that healthcare experiences really could be digitized and taken away from face to face. That was the macro story, right? And then beyond that, I'd say I mentioned we're playing a long game here. There are no shortcuts to designing a product right from what evidence-based content or process-based therapies go into it. How do you get the design right? How do you intersect clinical thinking and game thinking to get something very engaging, not just something very effective? And then, feasibility studies and randomized controlled pivotal trials and, working towards proving outcomes in financial terms, not just clinical evidence. And
Right.
those are heavy lifts. They just take a long time. And so we have various products in sort of different states in that pipeline, but it's, accelerating all the time and getting stronger all the time.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I think like you mentioned some of it in terms of from the VR, XR side, the work that Meta and Apple are doing, then the digital therapeutics that have done well, some companies going public, getting well financed. What does the future look like in terms if you are playing the long game to get the broader health systems and the payers and providers to begin to accept this as a medium, or has that already begun surprised you in terms of how much acceptance there already is for the technology and the efficacy of it?
I would say, so there's a couple things. One is there is pending legislation in the House and the Senate today. It was introduced 3 or 4 months ago now, I'd say. And there's an informal group known as the PDT, or Prescription Digital Therapeutics Coalition. A lot of credit to Pear Therapeutics for taking a leading role here. BehaVR is one of the companies in that coalition supporting and advocating for this legislation. It's got bipartisan support, House and Senate. It's in a process of getting additional co-sponsors signing on right now. And it's got a shot at getting attached to, some end of year legislation. It's a little bit impossible to predict, but there's momentum there. That would instruct CMS, so Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, to create a reimbursable benefit category for digital therapeutics, which does not currently exist. Right? Today they can pay for physician services, for facility charges, for DME, right, for drugs. There is no digital therapeutic category. That, with any luck, will change soon. Maybe it'll take a little longer. We'll see. That will certainly help. CMS is also already on the path of creating procedural codes so this can get billed from an operational perspective. Now, all that said, I mentioned my 12 years at Humana. I can tell you with some confidence, payers are not looking for new things to pay for. Payers care about outcomes and savings. That's what they want, right? And you better have both. They want their members to be healthier, but they want that because it also drives the economic engine with them. So we firmly believe, this is back to that value-based care dimension of the business model, you've got to lean in on, be a part of care delivery models that can drive outcomes and savings. I think that's more important than the FDA clearance. We think both are important. To be clear, I'm not suggesting you don't need the FDA clearance. I think it takes both because ultimately decision makers are going to look for signs of sort of risk aversion and mitigation. Do I know this thing's designed right, safe, effective, privacy's handled the right way, and so on? That's going to come from the FDA side. And then they're going to look for savings, which is going to come from real world implementation and showing that you can move the needle on overall utilization.
Got it. And as a founder, how do you track that? I mean, how do you think about what are the outcomes that we're working towards, FDA clearance, pipeline of partners? I mean, it's many things with building a digital therapeutic in this space, especially with a somewhat nascent technology. I mean, Meta is still pushing forward, but from a CEO and management perspective, how do you think about that?
Yeah, there's a lot of different dimensions, a lot of things to keep up with. more than I'd like, job one is never run out of money.
Right, right.
That's job one. And, so far so good. Um, Beyond that, we try to just stay true to the long-term vision of design it right. Don't try and take shortcuts. Find the right partners. That's a theme of our company. Everything we've done has significant partners. I mentioned Sumitomo Pharma, Confluent Health, the Hoag Women's Health Institute, Johns Hopkins, et cetera. And so design the right product, put the right work and heavy lifting in to show that it does what it is intended to do and drives the outcomes you want. And that, there's 5 or 6 different dimensions of that have to be managed. But that's what I focus on every day. The other thing I'd say, and this doesn't always help with the funding side of the equation when I talk about job one, right, which has never run out of money. I wish it was a simpler story about utilization. I wish this was a simple SaaS business, where it was just about ARR 3 months in. It's not. That's the reality. And so you have to be willing to go to market with models that maybe are not the end state model that you're ultimately going to do, but you're doing it for specific reasons to prove a product, get data, drive some revenue, and preserve the long-term view, which is sometimes a little more complexity than investors prefer to see. But we've been fortunate. We've got some that have that long-term view and vision that say, we get it, and that's where we want to go.
Right. Well, I know I've taken up a lot of your time, so just one last question, if we can squeeze it in. But if this bill passes that's in Senate and Congress, and CMS begins to reimburse for digital therapeutics, and Apple and Meta continue to push forward on this technology, how do you, when you're looking 5 years out, for the company, what does that patient care and journey look like in terms of where you want behavior to be, and what the patient journey looks like in that space?
So we will want, and we fully expect, more adoption of mixed reality technology, right?
Right.
Which is sort of this practical reality of how VR and AR are going to come together in the near term. As I said, we could do a whole session on why VR matters neurologically. Like, why not just do it on a smartphone? There are legitimate reasons to do it in VR. That will continue to advance. But there's another dimension, which is sort of the metaverse dimension, which is not the same as VR, as you know.
Yeah.
But one simple way to think of it, we think of the VR medium as driving certain mechanisms of action. Right? Why does this immersive multi-sensory simulation matter neurologically? Where the metaverse can add is mechanisms of engagement around creating through having a persistent 3-dimensional space that is perhaps mine, that I can change and modify and decorate, if you will, and keep over time. And I have identity, and I have rewards, and I have assets and ownership, sort of a Web3 lens. And most importantly, if I can have persistent connections and community, that's where I think metaverse, this notion of a place that you would go, whether you're doing it through a 2D screen in the moment or immersive through VR, a place you go where you have all of that persistent identity and assets and community and connection, and there are digital therapeutic experiences there for you to consume at your own convenience, all connected via the cloud to your clinicians and whoever's sponsoring all that. That's how we see it playing out. Now, that's the bold vision version of this that takes time to get there, and it won't happen all at once. But at the same time, for me, it seems absolutely inevitable. When you look at the trajectory of digital therapeutics, the trajectory of XR, and then how our kind of 2D/Web 2 digital experiences are heading for a metaverse and connected kind of Web3 feel. That's how that plays out.
Interesting. Well, congratulations on all the progress, and excited to follow along, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Yeah, I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you.